There are babies that have been dropped at the border unattended. I believe the number was closer to 463,000 that came across the border during the Biden administration, of which there was a Office of Inspector General report that came out in August of 2024 citing that 324,000 of those children were unaccounted for.
We have 50, 60,000 tender age, 8, 10, 12, 11-year-old kids lost in our country being subject to slave labor and sex trafficking. Democrats have boycotted this hearing.
324,000 unaccompanied children crossed the border under the Biden administration. The government cannot account for them, and Democrats boycotted the hearing where Congress tried to find out where they are. A former Border Patrol chief put a specific figure into that hearing room: 463,000 unaccompanied children crossed during the Biden administration. An Inspector General report from August 2024 confirmed 324,000 of those children are unaccounted for. When pressed to estimate how many tender-age children, 10, 11, 12-year-olds, are still missing, the answer given was 50,000 to 75,000 at a bare minimum. The testimony was direct. The children are in sanctuary cities. That is where traffickers bring them, because sanctuary jurisdictions refuse to cooperate with ICE. Every case became a cold case because the Biden administration placed a moratorium on serving charging documents for over 120 days. The infrastructure to find these children was deliberately dismantled. If this testimony deserves more attention than it's getting, subscribe right now. Congressman Gosar made a point that cut through everything else in that hearing. The human trafficking number could not have operated at this scale without NGOs, and those NGOs were funded with American tax dollars. When Gosar requested the IRS financial reports on those organizations as a sitting legislator, the documents came back completely blacked out. Congress is being blocked from following the money. 50,000 children, sanctuary cities, blacked out financial records, and an empty Democratic side of the hearing room. Watch the full testimony and decide what the evidence demands.
On sector.
I recognize Mr. Gosar for 5 minutes for question.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to go right to you, Mr. Rosas. I think it's very imperative that we have the financial backgrounds of all these NGOs, because you can't solve a problem if you don't know where the money's going, right?
Correct.
So if I told you the IRS already does this, would that make you just cringe?
Yes, it would.
And when I, as a legislator, asked for that report, it's completely blacked out. I'm not given the ability to even look at it. And I think that's a real fraudulent aspect here. We ought to if you take a penny, either directly or through a side view, you should have to prepare us with that money. And why I'm going with this is that we condition these people to do this. It started back in Clinton. He found out that he uses immigrants as political weapons against your adversaries. Then it continued to Obama, and it goes contrary that there were numbers where it actually decreased under Obama. He was called the chief of that dictation. But Biden just really took it to new levels, right?
Correct.
So what happens when the theater changes? So you find out these children go across and there are no questions asked. Doesn't that change the whole mantra of what follows that?
Absolutely. And what I would say is that, in Tapachula, where I just came from, there is a harder time organizing these caravans because, thankfully, because of the Trump administration kind of cutting off the funds, they're not able to be created in such large numbers because the infrastructure to support leaving the city and starting this long trek north is no longer there. Now, that being said, again, under a different administration and those funds are turned back on, the overall infrastructure is there to support another mass movement.
So once again, if we don't want this to ever play out again, we need those NGO numbers as where they're getting their money. Because, Catholic Charities, I'm a Catholic, they were horrendous down at the border because they facilitated all this. Tough love, I guess it doesn't exist. Mr. Clem, thank you for your service. Great seeing you again. How did the Biden's open border policies enable human trafficking and the flow of drugs into our district in Arizona? And what did you see on the ground?
Well, what I saw under that was something that I never thought I would see in my Border Patrol career, where the information that was given to the smugglers and the aliens coming across was just get to the border and Border Patrol will let you go. That has never been anything that we wanted to do. It was not part of our culture and our history. We were about, rule of law. And when catch and release became the process and the policy under the Biden administration, it was an open gate. There were times in my 126 miles of border that we had 10 people assigned to cover that border. And in reality, maybe 2 agents made it down there because we were literally dealing with hundreds at a time or thousands at a time. And in that, the problem lies is what's the threat in the mix? You know, we didn't have the time to do the true investigative work to find out where somebody's background. It didn't show up on our fingerprint data systems. We had no idea, so we just had to process them and turn them over to ICE, which again, under the same administration, said we don't have any room, so they got released. So we haven't even begun to see the tip of the iceberg of what could possibly happen with the people that were caught and released. That's why these operations you're seeing across the nation are so imperative. And Arizona took the blow, right? We took the punch right in the face in Yuma when we led the nation in the number of people coming in illegally for the first 2 years under President Biden. We were not a huge corridor for unaccompanied children, but we had our share of the UACs. What we had were people from all over the world, military-aged men from China, from Eastern European countries, former Soviet bloc countries. This was a big problem that really made border enforcement non-existent, at least for the 2 years that I was chief there before I decided to retire.
And then you further complicate it with these unaccompanied children because you don't know, there's no way to tell whose kid this is.
Well, I can tell you that a lot of the family separations that occurred that created unaccompanied children happened in Mexico by the smugglers. They would send parents to one sector, send kids to the other sector, or even split up families and, you know, make mom and dad become mom and dad of other kids, or separate children and send them through Tucson sector while sending a family to my sector. So it was a lot happening on the front end, which made it that much more difficult for us on the back end. And then what I discovered at my time at HHS was even worse than I could imagine.
My time's out. Yield back.
Gentlemen, let me open by saying to my Republican colleagues that have assembled here, thank you for caring enough about children of God, regardless of their nationality of origin or how they got here. We certainly care about these kids. They came into our country through horrible open border policies. They've been through, God only knows what type of trauma and what they've suffered. And I just want to point out for the country and for the historical record that Democrats have boycotted this hearing. I would certainly recognize them for questioning, and we would engage. This is a roundtable. Is designed to provide Congress with honest, candid information whereby we can perform our legislative duties in service to we the people. And clearly, our Democrat colleagues don't actually care about these scores of thousands of tender-age children that yet remain lost in our country. And I'll direct that question, my first, at you, Doctor. How many tender-age kids, just setting aside for a minute the 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds, let's say that they're, from a reasonable man's perspective, old enough to handle some of their own business. Let's talk about the tender-age kids. How many do you believe are still unaccounted for or lost in our country?
It's difficult to know the exact number, and if we knew the exact number, we would be horrified. And we would also be horrified at the young age. There are babies that have been dropped at the border unattended. There have been children that we've come across, case after case after case, that are being trafficked. One location in, I believe it was Houston, received over 40 UACs at one apartment complex.
Would like to hear, respectful of the gentleman's opinion there, would like to hear your best guess. We had 300,000, we have roughly estimated, came across the border. We've located, and to some extent, about half of them. That leaves about 150,000. Of those, I estimate about 75,000 are still unaccounted for tender-age children. Am am I accurate at all, or and please correct me if I'm not?
I believe the number was closer to 463,000
That came across
the border during the Biden administration, of which there was a Office of Inspector General report that came out in August of 2024 citing that 324,000 of those children were unaccounted for.
We read that. We're trying to get our heads wrapped around. We have 50, 60,000 tender age, 8, 10, 12, 11-year-old kids lost in our country being subject to slave labor and sex trafficking?
At a bare minimum, I believe that number is much higher.
At a bare minimum. A bare minimum. Chief, you said every case was a cold case when you tried to find these kids because of the Biden policies. Where are these young tender-age children? Let's use a round number just to be conservative. Let's say there's 50,000 still lost in our country, 10, 11, 12-year-olds. Where are they, Chief?
Yeah, I would agree that that number is around that 50, 60,000 mark, only because the majority were 14 to 17-year-old, which means...
Are they in densities of population
Yes.
that could be loosely identified as sanctuary cities?
Absolutely. So to your, absolutely, that's where they're going to be, because that's where most of these people can be protected, or in those suburbs.
Okay, so in sanctuary cities is where the traffickers would naturally bring these kids. So we're talking about 50,000 10, 11, 12-year-old kids being slave labored and sex trafficked. They're in sanctuary cities. And aren't sanctuary cities the government entities that won't cooperate with ICE?
They absolutely are, and that goes back to the point of every case is a cold case. The Biden, Harris, Mayorkas, Becerra administration, that's the food chain when it comes to unaccompanied children. They put a moratorium. Would not send charging documents. This is the actual notice to appear for more than 120 days.
I get it. That wasn't served for a few months.
Right. So we're starting
out
from
of
cold
time.
case. Yeah.
Respectful. Mr. Rosas, what role did NGOs play in facilitating the trafficking of these children?
The human traffickers could not have done this on a massive scale without the help of the NGOs. And it was made worse because our tax money went to those NGOs. So
was it the NGOs that were largely fraudulently operating and just devouring treasure? Is that correct?
absolutely.
Thank you. My time has expired, but my passion on this topic has not.